Hey folks, it's Joe. Those of you that have been listening to the show for a while know that I work as a film and TV composer, and today I'm really excited to bring you a conversation with Duncan Trussell, who, along with Penn Ward, co-created The Midnight Gospel, an incredible new show that I was lucky to be a part of. In addition to writing the instrumental underscore, I collaborated with Duncan on some original songs for the show. We even brought in some special guest singers like the Flaming Lips and Will Oldham. So check out Midnight Gospel, now streaming on Netflix. This is Joe Wong. Welcome to the Trap Set. During the age of social distancing, we're recording remotely and releasing episodes every day.
First we're born, and then we die, and in between most of us spend all the time crying.
Today's guest is Duncan Trussell. Duncan is a stand-up comic, the host of the podcast The Duncan Trussell Family Hour, and co-creator of the brand new Netflix series The Midnight Gospel. Although he would hesitate to call himself a songwriter, Duncan's songs comprise mystic multitudes and extraordinary charm. His affinity for lo-fi production and modular synthesis,
hey, how you doing,
his
man?
supernatural
Good, how are
sense
you?
of empathy,
I'm
and
great.
a wicked sense of humor,
What have you been up to today?
all inform a wildly unique creative
today,
voice.
let's see.
Duncan spoke to me from his home
just
in the
spent
San
last
Fernando Valley.
hour or so on a trampoline with my baby, and on a hammock with the baby, just sort of playing with a ball on the trampoline. We're teaching him how to flip right now, so that's what's, and then before that,
Wait,
I've
how
been
old is
playing
he?
this- Right now, he is like 15 months.
Oh, wow. And he already knows how to flip?
No, he knows the word flip, and he knows how to put his head down, and he knows, and that's it. He does not know how to flip. I think if he did, it would be it would be amazing if he started flipping, and it'd be one of the funniest things ever.
Well, you have plenty of time to teach him right now.
Yeah, I know, exactly. But you know, with a toddler, it's like it's this delicate balance between like libertarianism and authoritarianism. You know, like you can't let them do what they want. But that being said, you do have to be like flexible in these like moments. Like it would be easy to like become a tyrant for no reason. But then also it would be easy to like create a child who's like life is in danger because you have an unrealistic idea about freedom when it comes to a kid, you know? So it's this constant tightrope walk between those two. And you learn, you know, how to do it.
Does it make you think about your parents a lot to be a parent?
Yeah, it sure does, man. It teaches you so much about, like, you know, it teaches you. My friend put it best. He said, do a column and write on one side the things you love that your parents did for you. On the other side, the things you really wish your parents hadn't done, or the qualities of their parenting that were not, you know, bad. And then don't do the things on the bad column and amplify the things on the good column, because they're both sort of baked into you.
Yes.
And you don't realize it until, you know, all of a sudden you see like, you know, a quality of like, you know, for me, it might be like, God damn, man, I just want to like go be by myself. I can't handle being around this screaming kid and my stressed out wife. So then there's like an instinct to like retreat in a way that's completely not all right. You know, like I got to be there for them. And it's like pushes you in ways that force you to sort of like either succumb to your defense mechanisms that are, you know, maybe even epigenetic, who knows, or sort of stretch. You know, it's so good. It's so good for you on one level, but good in the way that like getting accepted into some kind of like Shaolin temple or something is good for you. It's not easy. And there's so many opportunities for profound failure.
It's interesting because I talk to lots of musicians on this show, and whenever I have somebody on who's a parent, that's a question that I'll ask them. I'll ask them, what about their parenting style is inspired by the way they were raised, and in which ways have they kind of changed the game?
Well,
So
because you know what's interesting, Joe, is like you can, it with all with you can. So the idea is, at least as I understand it, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, is we don't want to be reactionary. You don't want to be like in the times that you want to be reactionary are times when the baby's falling and your instincts kick in and you snatch him up before he falls off the couch or something. But there's certain times where that instinct has nothing to do with survival, and it's just how you think things are supposed to be. So it's like the problem is, if you like, let's say you have parents who fought a lot or were alcoholics or something like that,
right,
or like,
then you'll be like, my child will never see a drop of alcohol in this house, and then
or a fight.
yeah,
I will never fight in front of my child because my parents did that to me. So then all of a sudden what happens is this kid gets this complete bullshit idea about how human relationships work. And, doesn't understand that in human relationships there's conflict. And also, most importantly, the kid doesn't see the resolution of the conflict. So, it's like my wife and I get in quarantine, it's claustrophobic. We've gotten into fights, man, in front of the baby. But when we make up, and then we'll like kiss in front of him and then hug him. And like, then he sees the whole cycle. Like, yeah, people are going to fight, but we're also going to make up. And, we're learning that right now. In the beginning, because my parents fought, my dad would get angry. And like, in the beginning, I was like, wow, we will never do this in front of my child, which is so ridiculous and dramatic and silly. Like, of course you're going to fight in front of the baby. It's just, you got to make sure that you fight in a way that is healthy, if there is such a thing, as much as you can, and then resolve and, make sure he sees there's a resolution of the conflict, and a real resolution, not fake, like, okay, everything's fine now, I fucking hate you.
yeah. I feel
You have
like
to that's where the stretching and pushing comes, because it's like, damn, it's easy to pretend everything's okay, kind of, but it's a whole different ball of wax to like love a kid enough to work through stuff that is very painful, and that's what the child has given us, I'd say.
So what are some of the ways where you're consciously trying to diverge from the parenting style in which you were raised?
Well, like, so my idea, like, I've had to really I've had to become very compassionate and very compassionate with my wife. And like, and I'm not proud of the fact that in past relationships, I've sort of projected onto them, my past. And this is, I don't know, I think this is par for the course if you come from a dysfunctional family, is that, you're still in an argument with your parents, or you're still in some trauma situation, or you're still, grieving or whatever. And then, it's really hard to confront that. And it's easier than confronting this sort of internal pain or unresolved issues that you might have with your parents or your siblings or whatever. It's way easier to imagine that the person that you're with, just coincidentally, seems to be exhibiting the identical traits that your mother exhibited that in your mind caused you so much pain. And that's a wild coincidence. It means one of two things. One, you picked your mom to marry, which is a lot of people say that happens. Or two, which I think is more reasonable, you fucking have decided to use a human being that is completely different than anyone you've ever met, because it's an individual, as a movie screen upon which you can project your mommy or daddy or your failures or your whatever the fuck it is. And so this is the sort of, for me, there's just been a clear cut decision between, do I start actually working on myself? Not like I'm gonna read some Deepak Chopra and have a margarita. Like I'm either gonna do like the deep mining into the core of myself as much as I can with the help of therapy and teachers, and like confront what's in there as much as I can and as much as I'm ready for, or I'm going to just relive a dream that I had when I was a kid by sort of doing like reacting to things that aren't even there. I'm gonna pretend my relationship is a haunted house, and anytime there's a creaking floorboard in a haunted house, you're like, that's a ghost. And anytime someone in a relationship, exhibits a trait that reminds you of past trauma, you go, what's wrong with you? And suddenly you're back in a fight with your mama or your daddy or whatever, So I've been doing what I can to like really deal with like, oh fuck, man, I just kind of like swept a lot of shit under the rug from my childhood. And, the rug eventually just turns into like a mountain
Yeah.
underneath which is a lot of demons. You've got to go in there like the Hobbit, and deal with it.
Yeah, I try to be conscious of where the line is between self-improvement and self-obsession.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's the see. This is this that it's a there's no. It's like I think it's a little bit like surfing. It's like there's no you can't the way you would learn to surf is by going in the ocean. There's no one wave. They're all different, and every single moment is sort of this different thing. And you do have to like sometimes you really you got to set boundaries, and you're annoyed with someone because you're right. They're doing something fucking annoying, and you need to stick up for yourself. And
Yeah.
so spiritual bypass is a way to retreat into yourself and be like, that just must be my projection. No, it isn't. That person's being annoying. You need to say, please stop doing that. And so it's a good excuse to become like this like impotent, passive, quote, spiritual thing. I've tried it, man. It doesn't work,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So yeah, there's that. But then also you have to like, you'll notice some people get too caught up in that version of self-help, and then they become the tough love people.
Mm-hmm.
And those people just turn into assholes. Like all they are is boundaries and like, no, this is who I am. And I say no to you because it's like, you've got to be flexible. And there's no one way to be. It's always changing. That's been my experience with it. But the intention is really, at some point in this marriage with the baby, I just realized like, this is bigger than like anything that's ever happened to me, and it's worth more than anything that I think I have, and therefore I'm going to give everything in my heart and soul to like evolving myself and to being open to my family that I can, and that's a sort of everyday kind of thing that you do as a parent, I'd say. In some way or another. I mean, it's not like every day I'm waking up like, today I give it all to my family. But you know what I mean? In the background of it all is like, this little boy, it depends on us, in every single way. Not just like the obvious reasons. Like he depends on us as like the hammock, the sort of temporary representation of the hammock of love that the whole universe is. So, not to put too much pressure on it, but there is a lot in there that's like, it's worth trying to be as kind as you possibly can.
Did you have a trampoline when you were growing up?
So my Aunt Jane had a trampoline and a terrifying bulldog that would, those are the things I remember about her house is she had this wonderful trampoline. It was very exciting. Whenever we went there, it was just wild to be on a trampoline. And then when you would get off the trampoline and there was this damn bulldog that, I think it's easy for a parent to forget how massive even a small dog is to a baby. Like every dog to a baby is everything to a baby is a giant. But like to have some fucking drooling ass thing that like it can look you directly in the eyes and looks like it is an ogre is terrifying. But yeah, no, I didn't have a trampoline. But
So your kid already has a leg up on you. Your kid has a trampoline.
No pun intended. Exactly. It will piss on you. And then this is like, exactly. And so, no, but, and like, I feel so, it's exciting to me that like he gets a trampoline, and especially right now that we're all inside. It's like, oh God, thank God we managed to move to a place that's got a trampoline and a yard and a swing set and a swimming pool. So it's like he's getting, like, every day he's getting to run around a yard. And the neighbors, the people who lived here before had a garden that is now growing strawberries. So
I like that
his
you called
name
them
for
the neighbors. They're like the time neighbors, right?
the time. Yeah, exactly. Our temporal neighbors in, like, months past, they left this garden, and now so we go out and he gets strawberries, and he has this wonderful name for all things that grow out of the earth. He goes, none, none. So he'll point to the garden and go, none. Or he'll point to the orange tree and he'll go, none. And so that's one of the things I'll do is, like, go and get an orange or a strawberry, and he'll eat it and just laugh. And it's like, I'm like, oh my God, this is what it's like to be with the divine creator of the universe. It's like truly a mystical experience because it's just so elemental and pure.
What kind of music was on in your house when you were growing up?
Okay, we listened to John Denver. I'll try to country hoes, country hoes take me on the road. Country roads take me home, and what's the song that John Denver wrote? I think my mom really
Rocky
loved
Mountain
Jacques
High?
Cousteau.
Oh,
So Calypso. You know the song, he wrote a song about, he was so inspired by Jacques Cousteau, he wrote a song about his boat, Calypso.
oh yeah, okay.
And that song,
I think he had a whole album called Calypso.
oh, he did? Wow.
Yeah.
So that kind of music, like, my dad was really into, oh God, he just passed away. He wrote The Gambler.
Kenny Rogers.
Kenny Rogers, yeah. And my mama loved, like, folk music mostly. That was what we listened to a lot, and probably some, like, country music from my dad. But that was what would have been on. Not a lot of, like, rock and roll, but mostly just, like, folk.
Were they musical people? Did they play instruments around the house?
Unfortunately, no. So I found this out later, after my dad had passed, and I was sort of going through his stuff in his yearbook. He had in his yearbook, someone had written, "You're going to be a great musician one day," and I had no idea. He never mentioned to me that he played the tuba in high school. He never told me. And when I was a kid, there was a piano that followed us around. My mom had this piano. She didn't play. She had a harp, though, that she played. Actually, now that I think of it, she had a harp, and she would play it, and, like, but we couldn't touch the harp. It was really nice, but it was forbidden to touch it. And I loved, like, I loved listening to her play it. And then she stopped playing it. And we had a piano, and I would, like, bang around on the keys, and I loved it. But I don't think I exhibited enough interest that they got me, like, piano lessons. I wish they had now, because I just love music now.
It's interesting because you grew up in Asheville, right?
All over. I was born in Georgia, and then we took this crazy path across the country. And I say I grew up in North Carolina only because that's where we landed after the divorce. And
okay,
but then we from Georgia, we ended up in Maryland because my mom got remarried, and we moved up to, like, Gaithersburg, Maryland for a year or two, and then came back to North Carolina where I finished out junior high school and high school. So I just say North Carolina because otherwise you end up in this weird, like, well, we traveled a lot. And I'm like, were you in the military? And you're like, well, sort of. My dad had PTSD and was trying to run away from Vietnam.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I didn't find that out until, I'm so lucky because I'm friends with this psychiatrist who works with MAPS, and he's, like, doing He's one of the people doing the studies on treating PTSD with MDMA. And my dad had casually mentioned to me that he'd been diagnosed with PTSD for his whole life. And I don't, the way he said it, people with PTSD, sadly, one of the symptoms is they don't want to express that they feel bad. It's a really great way to be if you're like on like a rugged mountain climbing trip or something and you need to be tough. Not a great way to be as far as survivability goes in your old age. But he had casually mentioned this to me, and then I was telling this psychiatrist friend of mine, yeah, he said he had a PTSD, and he's like, do you know what that means? You know what that means, right? And I'm like, kind of. I mean, I have a degree in psychology, but I barely paid attention. Then he just started like going through the symptoms of PTSD with me. And then without ever having met my dad, he just described my dad to me.
What was he describing? What symptoms was he describing that evoked your dad?
Man, he was describing the alcoholism. He was, self-medication. He was describing the lack of intimacy, like the not really being able to like fully open up and not like, in other words, like people with PTSD can become kind of like calloused. The best way to explain it, PTSD, is like watch any movie with John Wayne. And that thing that we register as that's what a man is like, that's
like stoic
actually
reserve.
What men are like in a country that's been at war for like 93% of its history because they all have PTSD. So that sort of like smoking cigarettes and drinking, you feel bad. What do? You smoke when you're dying. What do? You smoke a cigarette, you drink some booze, you die. It's all just like forms of like sort of attempting to like create some, blister of distraction or, sedation around this horrific event that happened to you when you were probably pretty young. And you just dealing with like just touching it can cause you to wake up screaming, or like, one of the stories I remember my mom told, which when I was young and it just didn't register, it was like when they were right after they'd been married, they were walking on the beach and I think a helicopter flew over. And he grabbed her and threw her down and threw his body on top of her. And that's PTSD. You can't, there's nothing you can do about it. You just, bam, you just like pure instinct, and then that haunts you for your entire life. So, in his old age, when he was opening up to me, he told me that at the VA, they had said to him, they'd just given him benzos. And the way they put it was, when you're having a bad day, that's what they called it, just take these. Because right now is this breakthrough moment in the treatment of this horrific condition, which is a memory problem, actually, a short-term memory problem. Something isn't getting filed away into long-term memory, it's just floating in short-term memory. And, because there's no real way to treat it outside. There's like different things, like something where you move your finger in front of their eyes. I don't understand that at all. But, the MDMA therapy is like showing like incredible results. But anyway, they didn't have that. So, when he was, been diagnosed with COPD and was dying and was opening up to me, it was when it all started registering like, oh my God, of course. Yeah, he's been like self-medicating this experience he had in Vietnam for his entire life. Not probably, it's not just that. It's like you come back from a war, or you come back from some horrific thing that you saw or that happened to you, and you're drinking or you're trying to ignore it, and your relationships are going to get weird. And then that's going to create an idea that like, you become jaded or angry, or, women or men or whatever. And then that's going to pile on top of itself And then that's what so many people are going through, and they don't even know that's what it is. They just think their parents are mean. My dad's just mean.
Or that he's not trying.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. They just think that abusive motherfucker, and they're right, by the way. It's like, yeah, it is, regardless of the causality. If someone's abusing you, they're fucking abusing you. You just don't.
How was he being abusive?
I'm not necessarily referring to my dad when I say that, though. I do think that, like, if you are an alcoholic parent, then it's going to be highly likely that you, in some way, shape, or form, are not presenting an environment around your children that is conducive to them experiencing the kind of equilibrium that they need to grow into healthy adults. It's chaos. An alcoholic family is a chaotic family, and children of alcoholics we become really incredibly, like, pathologically empathetic. So we like are so sensitive to the change that occurs when someone has gone one drink over the line, that if we're in a situation where not just that happens, but where suddenly someone's mood turns, we become really stressed out, because that was usually in our childhoods followed by a fight between the mama and the papa that could be violent, and if at the very least could be like loud and scary. So yeah, that I think that was some early childhood stuff. And the reason I'm hesitating to talk about it is because he's a really good man and a really good person who had some really challenging early years. And, I feel a lot of compassion for him, and the love he gave me as a father was so profoundly beautiful, based on what he was dealing with. And he evolved also. That's the other thing about him. Over the years, he mellowed out. He got better and sweeter and kinder and more open. And, I wish we'd had more time together, because he was really evolving as a human in this beautiful way. People do change. I really, really dislike the conceptualization of a human being as being some sort of like coded mechanism that is unalterable or something that some people have. I think that's a brutal trap to put somebody in. But yeah, in the early years, man, it was pretty tough.
And your mom was a psychologist.
Yes, well, that came after the divorce. That's when she started studying it. We moved to North Carolina, lived with my grandparents, and that's where she started going to school and got the credentials she needed to become a clinical psychologist. Yeah.
And then you went into psychology too.
Yes, I did. I followed in my mama's footsteps. Now, the reason that ended up happening is because at Warren Wilson, you couldn't get a bachelor's degree in philosophy, which is what I thought I wanted to study. So I ended up like...
Was philosophy part of the psychology department?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think any good psychology department has got, yes. Yeah. We took philosophy classes with this brilliant man named John Casey. And my favorite thing, and this is like, had my life gone a different way, I easily could have ended up going into like seminary or something, because I became so obsessed with religion, like studying religion. And so I minored in religion, and there was this amazing teacher named Jeannie Matthews, who was just so brilliant and so good at just teaching world religion in a way that was like, it's hard to explain. It was just juicy. That really like connected you to like the life of that religion in a way that was like, the kind of thing you can get at a liberal arts school that wasn't biased, or like, it was like, she was taking us to mosques, and like, it was amazing.
You were kind of falling in love with learning about world spiritual traditions.
Yes.
But you were mentioning that you could have easily gone to seminary. I mean, were you a believer in any particular faith?
Yeah. See, because what happened was I ended up, like, one of the most profound moments of my life, what happened at the Laguna Beach Hare Krishna temple, where my brother had, been living in LA during the, one of the big earthquakes. And they, like, because the apartment he'd been living in had its foundation had gotten fucked up from the quake, the Northridge quake. He had uh, been able to, like, get a free apartment in Laguna Beach. Like, the state just paid for his apartment for a year. And he had this, like, he was going through this amazing hippie phase at the time. And he, like, had been hanging out at the Hare Krishna temple, chanting Hare Krishna, hanging out with the devotees. You know, I was sort of delighted by how worried my mom was about him. And, it was so cool. It's like, this is like,
Because she
I
thought he
tried to
was joining a cult?
Yes, yeah, she thought he was going to go bye-bye. And like, I've been trying to, like, horrify my mom for years with, like, I remember, like, I intentionally started listening to Iron Maiden just because I thought it would, like, upset her, which she was a good enough therapist to be like, all right, go ahead and listen to Iron Maiden, like, whatever. But the Hare Krishna stuff, it upset her because she was, well, for one, rightfully so. She'd met people who had like had been affected by the early days of that religion in the '60s when it was more cult like than it is today, and she just didn't understand it. That being said, that particular form of yoga, it doesn't really tiptoe around its fundamentalism. I mean, it does have a backbone that is really connected to it invites you into the brahmachari ashram is what it's called, which is a renounced way of living. So if you ever see a Hare Krishna whose head is shaved, wearing robes, chanting on the street, you're looking at someone who is an ascetic who sort of at least that moment in their life has chosen to connect their entire being to the service of Krishna. And that's a really ancient tradition. But in this culture, you see that and you're like, that's a motherfucking cultist, But in other cultures, that's not as it's literally called the cult of bhakti, and it is like, yeah, you're gonna let go of the entire hypnotic spiral of the default reality that you were conditioned and raised inside of, and by the process of doing that is to become increasingly drawn in or convected, I guess is a word I just learned, inhaled into the spirit of the divine. And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that idea of wanting to escape the culture or the situation in which you're raised is very real. And I think it's also why, say if you're in India and you are outside of a Hare Krishna temple, you'll notice that most of the practitioners are not from India. It's people that have made a pilgrimage because going to another place that seems exotic is representative of that kind of escape.
Well, see, that's exactly right. And in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is talking about the type of people who come to seek God, one of them is the seekers after gold, and which is really a beautiful thing because it's saying, yeah, it starts off any path into the divine is going to start off with, like, weird motives that will seem escapist and probably are. And you will have this sense of, like, Jesus, there's something that just doesn't seem quite right about the culture that I'm in, the family that I'm in. There's an itch that just isn't being scratched here. And there's a lot of colorful qualities to all of the world religions that sort of are like, do for the human mind what laser pointers do for cats. And that's just to get you into the lobby, so to speak. And then what starts happening is, and this is where it can become, depending on where you're at, terrifying. There's this, I think there's a verse in the Bible, which is, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And it can become terrifying because all of a sudden, the part of you that was like, oh yeah, this is just going to be another costume party. This is another thing I do. Like when I was wearing big baggy pants and going to raves, or, when I was
Listening to Iron Maiden.
listening to Iron Maiden, or fucking around with my like mild goth phase. Right. But then what happened to me, at least, was
Yeah.
this was on Jamastami is what it's called, which is they call it the appearance date of Lord Krishna, or when Vishnu incarnates as baby Krishna in Vrindavan. And that's called, well, it's like Christmas for the Hare Krishnas, essentially. And so Jamastami, I think, is, anyway, so I'm just, I started chanting Hare Krishna just because I enjoyed the mantra, and the way it was making me feel was like, it reminded me of LSD a little bit, which I love to this day. And like, there's a psychedelic quality to it. It seemed to be altering my consciousness. And I found that to be curious in the sense that it was, on the surface, it's just repeating Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram, Hare Hare, over and over again.
Well, it's just a
What's the
form
big
of
deal?
meditation, really.
Yeah, it's a meditation, but it's like, but then something else. And for me, it was really, this has been my first like encounter with any kind of like extended practice of any form of meditation, and so it was, I mean, I could still remember sitting on the roof of my brother's Laguna Beach apartment chanting Hare Krishna, and it was just, there was this sense of like warmth, or not like because it was summer, but like Ram Dass, the way he puts it, is coming home. It was like a feeling of like, fuck, this is like, what is this? This is, it also kind of like the first time you smoke DMT, there's this strange sense of familiarity with that alien landscape that is really wild. And you're like, how the fuck do I know this domed, glowing, like alien technological landscape that seems to be like some part of like some spiritual technology that's been here forever? And then you come down and you're like, what did I just say? But anyway, that day, I had gotten stoned, and I'm watching this beautiful ceremony that's happening, as they have these, the deity of Krishna. Like there's children fanning it with peacock feathers. They're pouring milk on it. They're like, ringing bells, and the whole temple smells like flowers, and they're chanting Hare Krishna. And that is when I had my first, I guess you would call it like a mystical experience or encounter with God. And you hear about, this, and I'd read about it, and I guess I probably thought I'd had it, when I was younger, through like LSD and tripping and stuff. But this was the, the best way, like the way my mind was trying to process it, because that's all you've got is like your past experiences to compare something to. And so my mind's sort of translation of what was happening to me was, oh, this is what an actual spaceship looks like. This is what a super, 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 super advanced alien civilization would look like, or this is what the mothership looks like, or this is what, like, because all the symbols that my brain had was like Star Trek, like it didn't know how to process it in any other way than to like try to turn it into some kind of like sci-fi rendition of what was happening, which was, when I look back on it, I think I had opened up enough to experience the reality of universe that we're in, which is a universe that is the exhalation of of the source of everything. And that moment was, and the realization was, oh wow, this whole time as I'm thinking, oh my God, look at this kind of archaic way of making these sculptures that look like God, and offering flowers to them. It's beautiful and relaxing, and it's really cool, and it's sort of edgy or whatever. But I mean, come on, this is some Indiana Jones shit, right? Like, they've got to know this is just some antiquated blah, blah, blah. I realized that was my ego, that was my hubris, to imagine that these people who've been doing this for millennia, we don't know how long, they're just kind of, they're off track a little bit compared to my modern mind. But I'm going to engage in this sort of stuff just because it makes me feel kind of good. It's trippy. I'm kind of a hippie.
And
Suddenly
you
it
get
was
to
like,
piss off your mom.
and I get to piss off my mom way more than Iron Maiden. But then suddenly it was like, oh, wow, wow, wow. Holy shit. Like, this is actually one of the ways that something that is outside of time sticks its fingers into our reality, is via the appearance of these deities, which are some form of antenna, and even that is a degradation of what they are. And so, in the articulation of it, and so. A better way to put it would be, and this is actually, we were talking about this the other night, you hear in Christianity a lot about blindness, the curing of blindness, or like in that song Amazing Grace, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. It was like that, like someone had lifted a blindfold up off of my eyes just for a second. And then the blindfold, I probably just was like, okay, that's enough, and pulled it back down because it was too much at the time. My ego was too fixated on the reality, default reality. I wanted to be in the modern world. I wanted to be a modern person. To this day, I do. That's my karma. I didn't want to shave my head. I didn't want to wear robes. I didn't want to surrender to that reality. I wanted to be in my human incarnation. And that's why I'm in what's called the Grihastha ashram, or the householder ashram, which is, I have a family, because that's my karma. And also, there's no hierarchy there. That's just what my karma is like right now. I like to play music and make stuff, and get high and drink and have dogs, and be with my wife and my baby. That's just what I'm drawn to, and that's in every single way that we are attracted to the world, there is a principle attached to that isn't guilt-based, but is like, oh yeah, that's great. That's God. You can see God in everything, which is why I love Bhakti Yoga, because in the mythology of it, Krishna comes to us in all these different ways, as a friend, as a parent, as a lover, as a baby, and as death. And so there's all these different ways that God shows up in our lives. And, there isn't any right way. I mean, it's the source of right. So that's the beauty of it. It's more of a recalibration, so that you begin to sort of attune yourself to that presence whenever you can.
Mirror man, who's reflecting who? Can't tell who's more alone. Is it me or you? I'm sorry to say, but this is goodbye. Hope the next thing you reflect doesn't always make you cry. Mirror man, goodbye.
You finished your degree in psychology, and then where did you go?
This is where I met Emil. And so
Emil Amos, who was on the show last week.
Yeah. So this kid, I've been fucking off. I got back after hanging out with the Hare Krishnas, and nearly being derailed into becoming a chanting Hare Krishna, shaving my head on the precipice, I guess, but it didn't happen. I head back to Hendersonville, North Carolina, and I'm just fucking off. I'm living with my mom. Then I'm like, what am I doing? I'm too old for this. I ended up moving in to like a shitty apartment in Asheville, North Carolina. I had fucked off in high school too much to um to go to college right away. I had to go to community college, AB Tech Community College, where I fucked off even more. And then, but I didn't. I like was focused enough that I finally get accepted to this liberal arts school, which is basically like, thank God for that place. They accepted me. It's a place that only, I think at the time there was like 600 students there. It's a work college. Everybody has to have a job on campus, and so and I was like, I was fine. I was so excited about like finally like having the stability of being in college and having a place where I could learn. That was where I was really enjoying learning, and they're really good at teaching there in a way that appeals to people like me. But there was this. I was in some like, I don't remember what it was we were studying now. I think it was a class on. I'm trying to think. I think it was like we took a class on like feminism or something, and like I liked it. I was listening, and like there's this kid in there with like a hood over his head. He seemed like fucking depressed, and he was just like not paying attention. And I remember looking at him and like completely like thinking like, wow, look at that slacker. He should be listening. This is not high school anymore. Why is he even here? And I remember thinking like, what, God, what a, he wouldn't, she would ask questions. I think he said some cocky thing once. I was like, wow, what a cocky asshole that guy is. And like, there was a pinball machine in the, I don't know what you call it, where all the place under the cafeteria. And I remember like, I was playing pinball, Funhouse. And we played pinball together, and he said some sarcastic but funny thing to me. And again, I was like, God, that guy's a dick. And like, then my dad, who was a shopping center manager, had one of the stores had I defaulted on rent. And when that happens in a shopping center, they'll just lock it and take all the property to pay the rent. And so my dad had like called me like, well, son, we had to shut down VX, CD, the VX CD store, whatever the fuck it was called, And do you have any CDs you want? And I'm like, I don't know, like maybe, I don't know. I'd heard, I like Pink Floyd, The Wall. So I was like, maybe some Pink Floyd or something.
Yeah.
And so my dad's like, all right, son. He sends me like a box of just like Pink Floyd CDs. So I'm like, probably the entire selection of Pink Floyd from this poor dude who just wanted to sell records in Mobile, Alabama, and it didn't work out at the Mobile Festival Center. And so like, I'm sitting there with this box in the cafeteria, sort of shuffling through Pink Floyd CDs. And like Emil sees that, he sits down, he's like, whoa, what are those? And he's like, wow, hey, well, you want to come listen to music with me? I'm like, yeah, why not, And he like had this fucking terrible roommate who was awesome. And just this like crazy, wild, chaotic being who was like scary but funny. And his dorm room was like kind of like this disheveled, like scene straight out of like, like, I don't know, like a Dostoevsky short story or something, just a mess. And like that was the first time I'd ever seen a 4-track. He had a fucking guitar, and like, just the way he was, I'd never met anybody like that. I don't think I'd ever really encountered like an actual outsider. And like, and so then, we got to talking about music and drugs, and, we pretty quickly realized we were going to be friends. And then he had made a tape for me because he had recognized that I loved music, I think. And so he gives me this tape, and it's fucking Daniel Johnston. It's like Sebadoh. It's lo-fi, which he was his, like, the kind of music he was into. And like, I still remember putting that tape into like whatever, like I had like a, tape player. At the time there were still tape players, and hitting play. And it's fucking that Daniel Johnston song, rock and roll, E something G. It's like, there was a day when I was so lonely. Time slipped me by, I was more dead than alive. And all the girls already had boyfriends. It was like just describing my childhood to me. I'm listening to it. I think I'd been profoundly depressed for my entire life and not even aware that I was depressed. I'm listening to like Daniel Johnston's soul wailing into the universe, and then it like hits I guess it's the bridge of the song. I don't know what you call it. Oh, that rock and roll, it saved my soul. It's so hardcore. It was like listening to the abyss or something. I hit stop. I'm terrified. I'm pissed at emo. I'm like, this is satanic. Like, this is actual Satan. What the fuck is this? That was a profound moment in my life, because that was like an encounter with great music, and it hurt me, as most great things I've ever like encountered have, in the best way possible. Like, it hurt. And and that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship with emo.
Did you see yourself as a musician?
No way. No, man, I never saw myself as a musician or a comedian, or I never like saw myself as only now do I think, oh, I think I'm an artist. Like, I never thought of myself in that way. I just, I just like gravitated towards, I loved art, like I don't think I had at the time, I just didn't have the confidence to be like, maybe I could do this. And emo was kind of encouraging me in that way, but the way you should encourage somebody, which is barely ever, because it's like with music or art or anything, if someone's going to do it, they're just going to do it. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be like it. And if they're going to do it, and I think this is kind of one of the ways he did mentor me, even though he was like infuriatingly younger than me, and infuriatingly great at playing music, and like infuriatingly motivated at like this young age to make music. Like he was really like, that was one of the things that pissed me off, is like we would take acid, and somewhere like 3 hours into the trip he would be like, I gotta go, and he'd go to his dorm room to like make music. And I was like, what the fuck?
He's being constructive. What a dick.
Yeah, like, dude, we're tripping. You don't go and do art. Like, what are you doing, man? Like, and so I found that like particularly like, annoying. But he was still like, I was just lucky, because he was like, exposing me to this like way of making stuff is like, I think you have to be really lucky to see that. And I don't even know if I'm sure it still exists. Obviously, anybody who's got a 4-track or whatever, but it was just like it was like a wonderful. It was like, we were both into like Hermann Hesse, and like it was just like this cool, like kind of like, I want to call it like a platonic romance that can only
like
happen
that
in college, and it's like mythical. It was like amazing.
Yeah, the mixtape is like the Valentine.
Yeah, exactly, man. And it was like, so he introduced me to this friend of his. I won't mention his name or whatever, but like, he would sort of like, I think, derailed emo in like the perfect way, and sort of had like spun him into being the great musician that he is today. And then me and that guy started having this amazing correspondence back and forth. And he would send me like, he would just leave these voicemails for me where he was playing guitar and singing. And then I would give those I would like be like, emo, listen to this. And emo would record. It was like getting little relics or something from somebody, because it was some of the most beautiful music ever. To this day, I lost a lot of it, and I feel a lot of regret about that because I didn't even know what I had at the time. That's the problem. I just didn't know what was happening. Like I was so in the moment of it all, which is probably good. It's senseless to try to, grasp at a reflection in water or whatever. But it was like, I was getting like the beautiful music on a voicemail from this, eccentric genius that to this day I don't mention his name just because he chooses to be anonymous, and I get it, man. But like, it was really wonderful. It was like kind of like being inducted into a mystery school or something, except a musical mystery school. And then, yeah, it was wonderful. And so then after that, we've been tripping out. We went to India together, and after that, I just like, what do I do with my life? I have a degree in psychology. What am I going to go to grad school right now? My grandmother died. She left me like 10 grand, 15 grand, something like that. And so I decided that I was going to move to either New Orleans or LA. And both seem like cool cities. I think I picked LA because I visited my brother there and I had some familiarity with it. And also there was like that kind of like trope of just driving across the country, which I did. And I just landed in Santa Monica. And there was really no direction. I thought the 15,000 would last me a year. That's how dumb I was.
How long did it last you?
Not long. I spent it on acid. Like I got there.
What kind of acid were you buying for 15 grand?
Oh no, acid and synthesizers and rent and food and Carlo Rossi wine. I just spent it on decadence, I spent it on and I didn't care. Like in those days, I just didn't care. Like
no, but that's kind of like that's what we can call a Duncan Trussell starter pack. A jug of wine, a synthesizer, and some tabs of acid.
Yeah, and also you need an emo, and you need some Hare Krishnas mixed in,
and
there
a 4-track, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and a 4-track, yeah, and also maybe some deep depression. That because again, I just don't think I understood what I had been through. Like I think that my childhood growing up, my mom had been married and divorced twice. I had not had any kind of and I'm not lamenting this. I don't feel like a victim. I think I don't feel like a victim. I think that it was a rough time for a kid, and I just don't think that. And this is what happens to people. I think they just don't. You come out of whatever you come out of, and you just don't even, because that was normal to you.
Right.
It seemed normal to be moving all the time. It seemed normal to always, be settling down at a place and then leaving. It didn't, you know what I mean? It seemed normal to have this aching feeling inside all the time. It seemed normal to sleep too much. It seemed normal to when things were really bad, just go to sleep for a long time. That you don't register that maybe this is fucked up. Maybe you're not, maybe you're maybe you need help.
Right.
Or you just,
or that it's a failing that you're sleeping all the time. I guess I'm just lazy.
Yes, exactly. And that's right. And then you can, and then you can build an altar to that laziness. And you can start saying, I'm a revolutionary. I've disconnected, but really it's pain. It's this pain, And so, and I just didn't care. I was and this is not to say I'm moping about all day long. Or there was a time when I was in college where I seriously considered suicide. There've been a few times in my life, none recently, but where I've been so profoundly depressed, I have authentically contemplated killing myself. And, so for me, there was a period in my life where being in a mess was normal, having a messy room, which was usually what I was living in, or my apartments were always filled filth pit of depression. And I didn't know. I was just like, oh, this is how you live, you know. You don't clean up. Yeah, old jugs of wine scattered everywhere. Just you know, taking like big doses of psychedelics, melding into the universe, and just sort of like chaotically wandering through life. And my landlord was a legitimate crackhead, like smoked crack, and wonderful person though. It's really like, you know, another like outsider artist person. It's like crazy beautiful. I think he was like Norwegian. He had these like blue eyes. He was like this crazy, grew up in LA, like California person who, like, I just found the place because I parked my car because it was near the Venice pier. And I just wanted to go to the edge of the pier because I just driven across the country, and I was like past this dude who was working on his car, and somehow we started talking. I'm like, yeah, I just drove across the country. He's like, are you looking for a place to live? And I'm like, yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely need an apartment. I've been staying at a youth hostel. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, I have a back house. Let me show you. He walks me to this back house. I didn't know anything about where I was in Venice, what Venice was, anything. He just shows me this back house, and he's like, you know, $600 a month. So I'm like, great. And he's like, you can move in next week. Something like that. And then I, you know, come with my car with a trunk full of whatever the fuck I thought I should bring across the country. And I had met these two beautiful German girls at this youth hostel. And like, I was like bringing them to this place. And this guy whose dad was so pissed off at him, had rented his house he'd been giving to me, was like, oh shit, I know I'm supposed to be out of here. He had like a sleeping bag on the ground of this shitty apartment in Venice. And I was like, whatever, dude, you could sleep on the ground a little bit longer if you need a place to stay. The guy ends up like taking one of the German girls from me that was so hot that I was like on the precipice of kissing. This guy like steals the girl from me. Not steals. I mean, the dude was like way hotter than me, and like I get it, but like, you know, it was like hilariously frustrating. He was sleeping on the ground of this shitty apartment with me. Then he moves into the house, like back house of the back house, which is a concrete room. And then, you know, we got to be friends. I remember he was like giving me this like tour of LA, and we passed the Comedy Store. And he's like, that's where the real comics go. That's Pauly Shore's mom owns that. I was like, holy fuck, Pauly Shore's mom owns that? Hollywood. Whoa, Pauly Shore? You know, I like the Wheeze.
Yeah.
My friends were skateboarders in high school. We would watch like you know, Totally Polly and laugh our asses off. And like, so anyway, I ran out of money and just ended up working on the phones at the Comedy Store.
And then how did you make the leap from being the phone guy to an actual comic?
That was because by working there, you get 3 minutes of stage time every Sunday. And one of the things Emil and I did in college that we just loved doing was making prank calls. So we would like, and we were using his recording equipment to do it, and we would just call places. There was no way for them to like backtrace the calls because the college had a circuit board that they would like, if they like figured out, if like they called, which happened more than once, our friends who worked security would like think it was so funny because they would know we were making prank calls, and they'd be like, yeah, sorry man, there's no way we could tell who it's coming from because it's a work college. We're all friends with everybody. And we were making these ridiculous prank calls, and like, you know, the college was so funny. Like there was a teacher there who was another transformative being in my life named Bill Mosier, who was the one who convinced us to go to India. And we started playing those calls from him, and he would laugh so hard at these like ridiculous calls. That I think was my first real experience with making people laugh like that. Like he played it for the class, and suddenly this class of people's laughing at me. But I never was like, man, I'm going to be a comic. But I've always been kind of funny, and so anyway, like, these comics, these are coveted 3 minutes. You would have to wait in line for hours to get these 3 minutes. You're working a job on the phones where you're like making, I think, minimum wage, a little over minimum wage. And the only benefit that you were getting is these 3 minutes on stage. And the comics would look at me like I was insane for not taking advantage of that. And so eventually I just started doing stand up there, and I loved it. And then, but also I ended up like becoming the talent coordinator of the place because Mitzi liked me. And she was, at that point beginning her decline into Parkinson's. And, and I became, I guess I would say I became friends with her, but also her, employee, which was a very intense experience, man, because Mitzi, Polly's mom, was this like matriarch of stand-up comedy. She was a guru for real. Like people bowed to her. Like comics would come and literally bow to her. And,
well, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the Comedy Store was the center of the stand-up universe, and she had serious star-making power.
Yeah, man. And she was Jim Carrey's guardian, like legal guardian in the United States. Like she was like, she was, an art. If stand-up comedy is some shambling, insane, hilarious being, she was a pulsing artery in that being. And like, man, it was, I think, to me, I'm like, man, that must have been what it was like to be around Picasso or something, like it is that powerful. Like her canvas was the Comedy Store, and she was painting by, finding people who were funny and letting them go on stage and then making these lineups, which were identical to making a mixtape. Like she wasn't just putting comics on stage. She was like lining them up throughout the night based on what she thought they needed to learn, and also based on what she thought would be funniest for the audience. And so she was like, it was this brutal dojo where she was she had rules that were hilarious that no one was ever going to follow. No, but don't fuck the waitresses. Or like, she hated, the comics weren't supposed to date each other, but of course comics are going to fuck each other. It's just inevitable. And then as soon as they broke up, she would put them like next to each other on the lineup because she thought it was funny, because it was like continuous comedy, and it still is, where you have to bring up the next comic. So like if comedians were in a brawl, which was very common, there's always drama, and if comedians were pissed at each other, you better believe that she'd start giving them spots next to each other, so that one would have to follow the other, and one would have to bring the other up on stage and like shake his hand and say, okay, everybody get ready. This next comic is great. Bring him up. And she's a wonderful, wonderful artist. But she was like the kind of artist that, doesn't generally get acknowledged as an artist in Hollywood. But there's, a great manager in LA as an artist. It's just they're painting. The way they paint is like with artists. It's so odd.
Yeah,
she's so meta.
The music analog would be, say, a producer. Like she's kind of like the Quincy Jones of comedy in a way. In that,
that's it.
Someone like Quincy can see someone's potential long before that person sees it themselves and foster it and do it over and over with the biggest stars of multiple generations. And Mitzi's somebody that did that too.
I witnessed it, man. I would when I was a talent coordinator, I'd sit with her during these showcases where these comics who had waited forever to do 3 minutes in front of her will get on stage. And now this was an incredible thing to witness, because to get to audition for her, a comic had to recommend you. And so that was the only way in, is another comic who was already a paid regular, as it's called at the store, had to recommend you. You would get recommended for the showcase, and then you would go on stage. Now, you might have been waiting 3 to 4 months for this moment, and longer, maybe a year. And before that year, you'd been going up on the open mic at the Comedy Store for a couple of years. And finally, you'd gotten through the waiting list, and you step onto stage, and I would sit with her and watch it happen, where she would just look at them, and they would begin to talk, and then she'd be like, give him the fucking line. Oh my God, he's horrible. Who recommended him? And then sometimes someone would get on stage and I would think, damn, comic is not funny. And she would be like, they would get off stage and she would take their arm and be like, okay, I want you to start calling in, honey. You call in on Mondays. Talk to Duncan about it. And I would think, Jesus, God, that person isn't funny. One of those people, I'm not going to name names, man. And like, again, this is like a testament to why we need people like her. Because she didn't see who they were then. She saw who they were going to, saw who they were going to be in 10 years. You know, and one of those people that I would have never have thought, you know, ended up, I think, selling out like Madison Square Gardens. You know, and like that was what she could do. It was incredible and wonderful. And thank God, you know, people like that exist in the world. You know, we have to have people like that because an artist, you know, there are people who like might, you know, love making art and be an artist, but Jesus, if they don't have someone to challenge them and give them just enough acceptance to get them to work, then they can, you know, they'll just end up, you know, going off and doing something else. And the world will miss out, you know. And that's what she was. It was really cool to get to spend some time with her.
Earlier, you were talking about how sometimes children of dysfunctional families, or in particular alcoholic families, develop a heightened sense of empathy. And no matter how you've kind of developed your sense of empathy, I think it serves you really well on your podcast because, you know, it's very clear that you're trying to engage in substantial conversations with people and to really, you know, get a sense of who they are, and you have an intuition about people. When did you start doing the podcast?
So there are these two comics, Matt Dwyer and Matt Bronger. They had a podcast. I'd never even heard of what that was, and they invited me to go do the podcast. And it was cool. Like I was just sitting with them at this place. This manager had this like crazy sort of complex in downtown LA, RZO, Mike Rizzo. And I went down there and like did this podcast with these very funny comics. And that, you know, they're alt comics at the time. And to me, having been at the Comedy Store, I was kind of scared of alt comedy. These were the days of like Mr. Show and stuff, and like it was a controversial form of comedy at the time, and like alt comics could seem, you know, like disdainful of club comics, and club comics would be like, what the fuck are they doing with their notebooks on stage talking about philosophy? What the fuck? But like it was just, you know, the tree of comedy is always growing new branches, and they were on that branch of the tree. And so I think I felt I love Matt Dwyer. We had become friends. And anyway, I just did this like podcast, and it was really fun. I didn't think much of it. I think at the time I'd done this podcast, and then like I did somebody else's podcast. I think I was at the time. This is when I was dating Natasha Leggero, and her and I started a podcast together called The Lavender Hour. And you know, it was like she was a million times more successful than I was, and she was like just this like it's just, you know, it was just, she still is, she's this hilarious, beautiful human. And like we start doing this podcast together. We're sort of polar opposites in certain ways, like just like to this day we're really great friends. And like but there's this like funny collision that we had, and that was what the podcast was. But we didn't even know. We were just doing like, you know, we were interviewing people. She was friends with like people that were like, you know, really famous and like super respected, and like because of that, we were getting to interview all these like amazing guests, like Reggie Watts and like Tim Heidecker, and like people who like I felt like a lot of fear and trembling about, just because they're like, you know, elite, alternative, super intellectual, brilliant comedians. And we're doing these like podcasts and uploading them, and like people started listening. And I had been, you know, I've been doing stand up at this wonderful club in Atlanta called the Laughing Skull. And I got this call from Marshall Childs, who runs that place. It was a really great phone call, man. He just called and said, hey, I just want you to know, he literally said this. He's like, right now, people don't know much about podcasts, but in a few years, they're going to be huge. People are going to be listening to them in their cars. And your podcast, you gotta focus on it. Do it more. You're really good at that. That's another Mitzi.
Yeah.
He did that. He gave me that gift, and I heard it, and thank God I completely took his advice, and I started focusing on the Lavender Hour. We started becoming more. We started putting it out more regularly. It was people were really loving it, and then Natasha and I broke up, and I ended up I ended up living in a sublet apartment in Atwater Village, and our relation, we were friends. So I don't know if it happens sometimes that friends start dating, and that just doesn't work long term for romance, but definitely for friendship. But her and our paths had to separate, and romantically, and so I end up in this sublet in Atwater Village, and that's when I started the Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast. And I just that was the end of the road for me, so to speak, in the sense that Natasha literally gave me money. I had no money. I had no job. I had no real prospects. I was fucked, man. The only thing I had was our Lavender Hour podcast, and we just broke up. I wasn't going to keep, the way she puts it is, she got the dogs, I got the podcast. Because we had this wonderful dog together, Mayor Cutie. And yeah, so man, I realized if I don't make this work, I'm pretty much done. I've been fucking off my whole life. I've been
You didn't feel like you had the potential to become a successful club comic and make a living that way?
I didn't feel like I had the potential to become a successful anything really. But yet inside of me, I knew there was something that wanted to come out. I was doing comedy. I'd been passed at the Comedy Store. I had, I was a paid regular there. I was I was touring with Joe Rogan. I was out there doing stuff, but I had not had the experience that I think is so important in an artist's life, which is at some point, you gotta make it work. You can't, you get to a point where it's this is it. This is going to be this in LA, this sublet in Atwater with the mattress on the floor thing. This is going to be it for you if you don't make this work now.
All of a sudden, you're that Norwegian guy with the blue eyes.
Damn right. That's right. Exactly, man. Minus the crack. And so so that's when I had a great therapist. John Moody was his name. And he was wonderful. And he got me, and he saw that I was in this crisis, in this beautiful crisis moment. And he got me to start listening to this cheesy ass thing, which I think you could still do, called the 100-Day Challenge. And it's every single day, this guy will just essentially berates you. You watch these stock footage. He's you write down 5 people right now who can help you. And then you call, not borrow money help, but help you with whatever it is you're pursuing. And you call them right now and ask them for help. And you know what I mean? It was this, just every day, are you sleeping late? No, you're not sleeping late anymore. You're going to be waking up every day at 5 a.m. and you're going to get to work immediately. And it's just essentially the antithesis of depression, and I needed that. And so I started doing the podcast. I started, I realized I could get these pictures. Somebody drew a picture of me with my satanic puppet, Little Hobo. That was a beautiful picture. And then I realized I could go to Costco and print those out as posters. And because of the Lavender Hour, there were enough fans that I could start selling those posters. I would get them printed out at Costco for, I think, $8 a poster, and I could sell them for $16 a poster. And like, I was making money selling something. Holy shit. Holy shit. People are listening to the podcast. We started at the time, the DTFH had a forum. You know, Rogan, of course, was like shepherding me through all of this. He was helping me. He was delighted in seeing that like there was like some movement that was actually happening where I was beginning to sustain myself from my creativity. And then that I think I would say that was like the beginning of my professional career, where I started actually figuring out a way to turn my creativity into a livelihood. Thank God. But I wouldn't have gotten there if not for being just, all nets being pulled out from under the acid-soaked tightrope that I had been teetering on for most of my adult life.
It's funny because this show was started out of a similar place of desperation. I had been a musician for a long time when I started this show, but I had been disconnected from the joy of making music through a number of events, and I was just experiencing some pretty dark situations that were not related to music or my career or anything like that. But I was on tour playing drums in a band, and I couldn't listen to music anymore. It sounded like noise because I was just used to playing it all day long. And so I started listening to podcasts, and the first couple years of WTF were happening around then. And I related to the desperation that he had in his voice,
Yes.
that Mark had. And, he's told the same story. He was thinking about killing himself when he started that podcast. And like basically the premise is he would have, it's so funny because it's shifted so much over the years, but he would have people that were more successful than him that he was friends with on the show and be like, how come you're successful and I'm not? That was like the subtext of like all of the early ones. And I just found it really compelling for some reason.
Might I just add, by the way, and this is the hilarious thing to me, is that Mark Maron, to all of us young comics at the Comedy Store, was a tremendous success. So that's the other funny thing is like, that Donovan song? First there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is. That's a Zen koan. And like, that's definitely what it's like for, I think, an artist's career. Because for Maron, he's like, God, why am I not successful? But then for these young comics at the store, he would walk in and it was like a royalty had entered the building. And we would gather in the back and like, we would be in awe of his talent, And that's what's so funny is like, yeah, but in his mind, he's like, God, I'm failing.
And and like similarly in my own way, I mean, I was on the road with the great artist playing drums and going to Europe and like playing cool shows. But I felt it's all a mindset thing because I was disconnected from my own capacity for joy and being in the moment at that point. But anyway, the person I was playing with at the time was friends with Fred Armisen, who was on SNL, and we got invited to a taping. And the person that ended up being the first guest on this show, Brendan Canty, who's the drummer of Fugazi, was there, and I knew him through mutual friends. And after the SNL taping, we went to the after party, and I was like drilling Brendan with questions the whole time because he's somebody that I really looked up to. He'd been in a band that that was very important to me in my formative years. And then he went on to like have a family life and score movies and TV. And I was like, man, this guy's got it all figured out. So anyway, then he ended up being the first guest because it was basically like, all right, well, let me record me working my neuroses out with my heroes and see where it gets us. So that's that. But, that was 6 years ago, more than 6 years ago. And, I feel like for me, this show has been like a ladder that pulled me out of a very dark place and back to, fertile ground creatively and just in my life. Just being able to listen to other people and shut up and stop thinking about myself and engage in conversations has been a huge gift.
Oh, amen, brother. That is it. that, with podcasting, it's like when you and I were doing it, it was not there. There wasn't like a sense of, Marshall Childs called me, but I'd already been doing it. We had been encountering magic, like this thing you're talking about. We had been encountering this like magical quality of conversation that is healing. And, that is the paycheck. That's it. Like, the universe, thank Christ, has, supplied us with, some success for our shows. But, like if the economy collapses and if the dollar stops meaning anything anymore, as long as there's recording equipment, I'm going to be doing podcasts. And when the recording equipment breaks down, I'm going to be still trying to have conversations like the one we're having right now.
Well, I just think about how few opportunities there are to have substantial conversations with people, and how, as human beings, we're designed to connect with people in that way. But we've evolved, and technology has evolved to push us away from that, or to make it easier to connect on the most superficial level possible.
That's right. I mean, this is this is the eternal and delightful game, but which sometimes is compared to wrestling with God, sometimes is compared to being hypnotized by a great magician. There's so many different terms for it. It's a leela is one of the terms. It's a play, the play, and in this play, part of the play is that the world itself is so astoundingly hypnotic that it invites us to distraction in all these infinite forms. And it's like when you're in the forest walking, and all of a sudden you realize, like, shit, there's a river somewhere around here. I don't know if you've ever had that experience. You've been walking next to a river for hours, but then you hear it. It was drowned out just by being in the forest or your own thoughts. But it's like, well, holy shit, there's a river. And then you walk towards the river, and then you find water. And then when you find water, there's something so special about that, even if you're not in a survival situation. And I think similarly, podcasts are like that. This connection is a river. And it's a river that has been flowing from human being to human being probably since we've been before we were even linguistic in the way that we are now, when we were in the trees hooting at each other, and it's a beautiful thing. There's a term in Bhakti Yoga called the disciplic succession. And this is this conceptualization of this passing down of energy, this sort of telephone wire that runs through time. Like in the way my neighbors left me a patch of strawberries. It's like or my neighbors, my temporal neighbors, I have strawberries growing now because of them in my garden. That's how I know them, but the earth, their connection to the earth, their relationship to the earth, alchemically transformed into strawberries, which I'm now feeding my son. And so something about this podcasting, we get to meet each other like little brooks, for a second, flowing into each other. And then we all get to become part of this river of data that is so wonderful to be part of. It's the human experience. It's, and for me, that it's as beautiful as any other natural formation in this incredible universe that we're in. And it's wonderful, that we get a chance to connect at this level through technology, and then to share that connection. It's just, to me, it's one of the marvels of the modern age, is that it's not just that we can become the river, but now we can record the river, and then we can amplify the river. And then the quality of this particular river is that it heals. And I think that's it might sound lofty or whatever, but personally it has healed me, and I can hear that it's healed you as well to some degree.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that you were able to, take the wound and turn it into, the medicine, because you took this damage that you had as a kid and you developed a sense of empathy that enabled you to do this show. And then it drew you out, and it helped you kind of find your artistic center, right? Like you said earlier that you didn't think of yourself as an artist at the time when you encountered email. But by doing the podcast, you kind of came to terms with your artistic center. And then literally by doing that, you met Pendleton, who then connected you to me, and now here we are. So I think I would be remiss if we didn't talk about your show, The Midnight Gospel, which will be released today. This is coming out on Monday. So it's coming out on 4/20 today. And that's how we met each other. We both have a really special friend named Penn Ward, who previously created a show called Adventure Time. And he was one of my first friends here in LA. But he brought me in to meet you. But how did you meet him?
I met Pendleton through the I got an email from him. I think maybe Jesse Moynihan had been listening to my podcast and then got Pendleton to listen. And Pendleton, whoever told Pendleton to listen to my podcast, I owe him the world, man. Pendleton started listening, and then I didn't even know he was listening. And I just get this email from Penn Ward that's like, I like your podcast. And I was just, astounded that the artist who made Adventure Time was listening to me have these conversations. And that's how we became friends over the years. And that was the genesis of the Midnight Gospel and our friendship. And and I remember, because by the time we got to the point of making the Midnight Gospel, I was certainly some form of music snob. And I knew that I wanted the music for this show to be good. I didn't want some bullshit. Like, I needed it to be good, and not just good. I needed it to be like good and calibrated to like what Emil had taught me about music and like and so, he mentioned you. I loved Russian Doll, man. And I was kind of starstruck that you had made the music for that. Right. But I was still I don't know what I had no idea what I was doing, as always, so I didn't even know what a music producer, I didn't know who you were going to be. It was like the same exact experience when I was met the person who brought me to Ramdas, actually. Raghu Marcus. I was he was so cynical and skeptical. I'm like, I bet this Raghu Marcus, I bet he's going to he was on my podcast. I bet he's going to be like an imposter or, some new ager. And then this, normal guy, completely unassuming, is in my house, and he left, and I was like, my mind had been shattered because he, gave me, this connection to the satsang that I'm in, which is a name for a spiritual community. Similarly, when I met you, and we started connecting, and then you started demonstrating your ideas for the show, your thought ideas, but then your musical ideas for the show. And then thank God by that time, and I think I turned 46 on Monday. Oh God.
Wait, it's your birthday on 4/20?
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah. But man, thank fucking God. I think I've gotten to the point when I meet people like you, I recognize them. You know what I mean? I think I've finally gotten there, and towards the end of my, nearing the autumn of my life, I'm finally slightly attuned to genius. Thank God. And so, and of course, you can't. I mean, if Pendleton loved you and you thought so highly of you, I was already like, well, look, I mean, it's going to be amazing, but wow. Working with you is so cool. I'd never done it before. I'd never had the experience of collaboration that we had where it was like you heard what my musical aesthetic, what I loved. You knew the lineages, and you were able to take that and weave it into the show, but with your own brilliance. And damn, that was one of the craziest things ever. You know, that was making the Midnight Gospel. It was like over and over and over again, you know, being with people who are able to like filter out my own static, or like kind of catch a glimpse of what I was feeling or saying, and then tuning that in, refining it, polishing it, and then like suddenly this thing that maybe in my own mind had just been a rough approximation was in front of me a million times better than anything I could have expected, you know, which is what you gave the show. I mean, dear God, the
Well,
music that you made for the show is just so beautiful, Joe.
well, thank you.
You know, by the
But
way,
I think it also speaks to Penn's brilliance again, because what we were talking about, people like Quincy Jones or Mitzi Shore, people that know how to, they can see the potential of putting the right people together. And
Right.
Penn is somebody who's not only creatively brilliant, but has also had enough experience that he knows that the best way to make something great is to get like-minded people together. I mean, think about the people that were involved, from you to Maria Bamford to Ram Dass himself to your mom to Penn to Jesse. All these great minds, and there's plenty more. I won't. That's no by no means an exhaustive list, but one of the best things about working on the show was having the trust to feel like I could just be myself and fit into that family. And I think that's why it turned out great. And part of the reason why it worked is because you and I are on a similar wavelength, and I know I understood your aesthetic, and then also that you gave me the space, and you weren't trying to micromanage what I was doing. And that's a hard thing for somebody who's making their first project. Like, lots of people have a tendency to want to hold on really tight and force things. And I can't work with people like that anymore because I've been doing this for too long. And I just know it doesn't work for me. Like so anyway.
Well, Penn gave me that.
Yeah.
You know, Penn taught me that. Like, I already knew that anyway. Like, I've been at the Comedy Store long enough to respect, you know, one of the things at the comedies, you learn to respect artists there. You know, like, you learn that. It's so important. And so I already knew, like, and like, you have to temper your ego as, you know, in any collaboration, you know, you have to, like, recognize that, like, if you need to know what you're good at, like what you have to offer, and where are areas that you can learn. And once you figure that out, then collaboration becomes the simultaneous service and, like, receiving and evolutionary process, right? Because by working with you, I got to learn about music, you know, and I got to learn not just about music, but how, like, the process of making music. I mean, a high point of my life was being in the VO booth with Johanna. Remember that?
Who sang a song that we called the Prisoner Song.
Drinking blood from the stump of a prison guard that I just chopped up, that used to be freedom to me. Watching my cellmate cry as I sprayed hot piss in his gouged out eyes. That used to be freedom to me. But now it's plain to see the prison was inside of me. And
To me, it was like a song about my life, kind of, you know.
Well, the whole show is
really
basically a song about your life.
Well, yeah. You know, it's just like, anytime you hurt anybody else, you're just hurting yourself. And, like, but the song's sort of dirty and ridiculous, and like,
My poor
but
girlfriend
Johanna
had to
Warren is
listen to me, like, listen to that song 1,000 times in a day when we lived downtown in a loft, and I was like recording the drums and then the bass and then the piano and then I was like, picking vocal takes, and she's like, I can't listen to this shit anymore. I think she has PTSD from it. But the reason why is because it's also really catchy. So it's like, it's got these dark lyrics, but it gets stuck in your head. And anyway, but
just watching Johanna Warren and you work together, and watching the way you were like collaborating with her, and like, because she's watching two pros like meet in a place, and like instant, like where there is a temporal limitation if you're recording, like you only get a few hours.
But that's
but
what
then
I
watching
love.
how quickly you dialed it in, and the way you two were going back and forth, and then suddenly this thing that for me had been this like off key thing that I had sung become this beautiful thing. It was wild, man. I had never seen that happen, but it's like, what, you know what I mean? It's like you go to some alchemist's laboratory, and you've got I don't know, a vial of some substance that you think might have the potential to be refined into something beautiful. And then you're that alchemist, and you take that, and then you're working with another alchemist, and suddenly this vial of like what may have been something maybe great, but pretty putrid, it becomes this beautiful glowing thing that you never could have done on your own, and no individual could have done it on their own. And that's the convergence, man. That's where the stream meets the river, and that those moments are like, for me, that is the contact with the divine. That is the Hare Krishna deity. That is the protrusion of the eternal into the finite. And that is why I love art so much, is because those are the moments that you're going to get every once in a while.
Well, yeah, and I experienced that working on this show too, in the sense that it was the right show at the right time. I mean, the show is basically, lots of it is about reckoning with what it means to lose somebody that you love, or to lose yourself, and like what it means to have a self. And, the idea of how self and ego can be, it's evolved to keep us alive, but how it can also be a burden that gets in our way and prevents us from, feeling joy or connecting with other people if it's like overdeveloped. Yeah. And when we were supposed to get together, I think the second time when I was supposed to start work in earnest on this show, that's when I was driving to the fucking airport to go say goodbye to my dad, who died a few days later. And so, without kind of giving away too much, the finale of the show is kind of it's a very similar story about you reckoning with that on your end, reckoning with the loss of a parent. Yeah. And so it's like the music that I was naturally already writing, and lots of it is also going to be on my album, was about very similar themes to what you were exploring on the show. And we hadn't met, when I had started writing that music. Ultimately, there's a song that is on the soundtrack for the finale that it could have been written about what you and your mom were talking about, and it was also, I guess it was written about that phenomenon of, how our very will to live, at some point, that's something that we discard because we don't need it anymore. And then we become part of the universe again, or we're back to atoms,
Yeah.
But it was the right show at the right time. And another thing that was really fun is you wrote songs for almost every episode, and sometimes we would collaborate on it, or sometimes I would just help you mix it. But it was fun to kind of see you, feeling uncomfortable putting these kind of lo-fi songs into the world, but I thought they were really great. And I think that it was like a good counterbalance to the stuff that I was working on, in that yours was just like really fun, and it almost sounds like the kind of, I guess like the conceit is that the music that your character Clancy makes on his synthesizer in
Yeah.
his mobile home. So
Yeah.
it was really fun, and it was fun
Yeah,
to
man.
kind of watch you getting to create something like this for the first time, and then also work with like old pros like Jesse and Penn. So it was really a joy.
Let me tell you, similarly, like when I was in that Hare Krishna temple, when I was experiencing that, if you come from a dysfunctional family, you might think you don't deserve to be happy. Like you might think that that is not something that you deserve, that you don't deserve love. And so if you encounter love, you can go all rescue dog and like you can get real like, "Argh," or like, or usually to yourself, and so you stop that your capacity to receive love can become clogged up with all your pain, so to speak. And I think that's why when I was in that Hare Krishna temple and I had that experience, I pulled the blindfold down because it was too much love. I just didn't want to see it. I just didn't feel like that I deserved it. But if you're a human being on this planet, you deserve it. Any human being deserves it. And really, the only job is to pull the blindfold up to allow yourself to be part of the coalescing of love, which is any great collaboration. And so for me, that, thank God, by the time I met you and Penn and Mike Mayfield and Moynihan and all the brilliant people at Titmouse, I had in some way figured out how to like open up to like that experience, because that's how for me, getting to work with y'all was like Janmashtami in a Hare Krishna temple. It was like being taken into some kind of like you know a cult temple, and I mean a cult in the good way, not some dark way, but like a sacred place where like or like sometimes they talk about how difficult it is to get access to some of those amazing radio telescopes that can listen for aliens, and like you can only get like a day in some of those places because everybody wants to turn them into certain directions in the sky, and like that's what I felt like. I felt like I'd been given access to some place in SETI or something, working with like Einsteins, and you know what I mean, and like tuning in this thing that was a little bit of me, but was all of us. That's how I felt, and it was certainly a mystical experience for me. It was certainly filled. It was joy. It was joy beyond joy.
Well, how do you feel right now? The show is going to be released out into the world for other people to evaluate, judge, enjoy, and now it's beyond your control.
Man, I feel a lot of happy. It's very strange to feel compersion for a character in a show that you play, but I feel really excited for Clancy that his space cast is going to be received on this particular planet. Like, to me, it's like, wow, good job, Clancy. You're like, your space cast is really getting out there. It's going to a whole planet. And so for me, I feel this joy because I just know Clancy be like, wow, this is awesome. This is cool. We got, planets listening to this, to the Midnight Gospel. So, and also I feel a kind of bittersweet feeling because of the current global situation. And, on the news, it's so sad. You see these numbers which represent deaths of our grandparents. A lot of old people are passing. A lot of people are losing their loved ones right now all over the planet. And when my mom was passing, I got to go to the hospice with her. I got to sit there with her. I got to see people are not getting to have that experience. They're having to be separated from their loved ones. People are passing away and not getting to be with their families and not getting to like. So it's really bittersweet in a way, because damn it, you're too good an interviewer. When you get around a good interviewer, they make you cry. It's really
That's
hard.
podcast gold right there, Duncan.
It's just bittersweet to me that the show is coming out at a time when so many people are like really having to say goodbye.
It's a good time for it to come out. I mean,
yes, and that's the sweet part.
Yeah,
is that it has inside of it this this collaborative sort of love, this sort of like this thing that we have all experienced and put into the show, which is that how do we respond? How do we respond to loss? And how are we to be when we find ourselves confronted with like the singularity that is death? How that's why I like the name Midnight Gospel, because gospel means good news. And even in that place, I think that place being the place of saying goodbye, there is this light that shines through, and you realize you can't say goodbye. There's nowhere to go. You're always here. And in all these forms, what you called going atomic, or atoms, or however you want to put it. This is the our lives are blindfolds to some degree, and death could be compared to the lifting of the blindfold. And actually, that's what apocalypse means, is lifting of the veil. Mm-hmm. So. And also when people, that was a marriage tradition, the bridal veil gets lifted, a glimpse into the eyes of the divine.
It's a little patriarchal, but whatever.
Well, whatever. I mean, I didn't say there was a lady behind the veil. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's a tradition though. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tradition, and also, but also it's like, this is what I love about Bhakti Yoga, is that the entire, like, when you're chanting Hare Krishna, you're actually not, you're essentially singing to Krishna's lover, Radha, because Krishna's lover, if the being that God has fallen in love with loves you, then certainly God must love you. And so this is why we when you're chanting Hare Krishna, you're actually singing a song to God's lover. And so this is to me, the idea of art, I guess you could say, and that we're just trying as much as we can to sing a song using the symbol sets of something that was exhaled out of love. And it's a heartbreak to sing that song sometimes. You got me all choked up, Joe.
Well, Duncan, I think that's a good place to end it. So thank you so much for being on the show. And everybody with access to Netflix should check out Midnight Gospel, out now.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Joe. Wow, man. Holy cow.
The Trap Set is produced by me, Joe Wong, along with Chris Karwowski, who also edits the program. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at The Trap Set, and visit our website, thetrapset.net, to subscribe to our show for free. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please donate to our show. If you can't afford to donate, please tell a friend and give us a good rating on iTunes. Send your feedback and guest requests to thetrapset@gmail.com.